welcome subscribers. We are continuing our discussion with Philip Coppens, and I'd like to begin this segment to talk about a subject that I've been fascinated by these last few months. This is an old subject, of course, I know. It's regarding the Stargate conspiracy and also what Philip Coppens refers to as the Stargate Conundrum. He has an article series on his website in regards to this, and this, of course, I guess spawns from a book by Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince, and I guess I'd like to ask you, Philip, right up front here. You have contributed to their works. I guess you're you know them and you have worked together with them when they wrote their book. Is that right?
Yes. After they did Temple Revelation, the question was what they were going to do next. And at first they were thinking of pushing Temple Revelation back into ancient Egypt. Now, practically everybody was doing it at the time, and people like Hancock and Robert Bauval did a few faux pas with books like the Mars Mystery and things like that. So the publisher asked him to slightly redefine the book. And Clive and I, the first time I'd gone over to his house in 1995, by a strange coincidence, we began talking that very first night about the Nine and the role of the Nine in all of these things, and it continued to be a fascination for us. So when the publisher said, "Could you redefine your work a bit?" The obvious thing was that perhaps we should start looking into this Nine concept.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, time rushing and the specific, I think what you might call remnant of Temple Revelation, meant that Clive and Lynn during the writing chose to put a certain conclusion on the research, which I felt was not necessarily the wrong one, but wasn't definitely the most profound one which you could make about the research material there. Mm-hmm. So I sat on it for a few years, and then I kind of like looked at it and thought, right, I can make this into a book, but really I don't want to add too much water to what I have here. I wanted to keep it fairly condensed and push it out the way I wanted to be. So I did that. I rewrote it slightly. I published it as a bit of a New Year's present, I guess, for over Christmas of 2005, moving into 2006. And straight away it was very funny because on New Year's Eve, the first part had gone on the site a few days before, and on New Year's Eve I had signed off, closed down the computer, enjoyed myself for a few hours, and on New Year's Day I switched the computer on, and there were two emails, both from Uri Geller, and I kind of like thought, okay, excuse me, he's going to sue. I must have said because just why would he send two to begin with? And the funny thing was, they were the only two emails in my inbox at the time as well. I started to read them, and they were not at all negative. In fact, they were extremely positive. And other people who were involved started to read it. And in the latest edition, I've put that in the road news section of my website. A few weeks ago, somebody sent it to Ira Einhorn, who was a very principled person involved in the 1970s. He's now serving a life sentence in a Philadelphia jail for officially for the murder of his girlfriend, Holly Maddox, even though he vociferously continues to deny that allegation. But he has in his cell he has now said that the article series is something which starts to make sense of their life, of his life, because the one thing which I guess is true to everybody, when you're a child, it's very difficult to accept that your that your father or your mother might know more about you than you actually do, and that they might actually, have some good advice for you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not at all pretending that I've got good advice for the likes of Uri or Aya,
Mm-hmm.
but what they do appreciate in the Stargate Conundrum is that even though they have lived the life which I kind of like talk about, they have lived their parts of the entire story. And what they seem to appreciate about the Stargate Conundrum is the fact that it puts their life in a larger framework, and that people like Uri, Ira, but other people like Jack Sarfati and a few others, even Hal Puthoff,
Mm-hmm.
they see that their parts of the puzzle are indeed parts of a larger puzzle, and that my series of articles is perhaps not the truth, but it's at least the first attempt to try and make a logical framework out of all of those pieces.
Yeah. How was it the work through Puharich that first made you aware of the Nine, or how did you kind of pick up on that whole theme there?
The first I picked up on the Nine from two things. One of them was actually a book called 2/3 by David Percy,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a visit to David Percy and a meeting with Mary Bennett on that October night in 1995 with Clive that got us talking about it. He had been interested in the Nine from another perspective. He had been reading books like Uri by Puharich. So we kind of like decided to start looking into that. And the story of the Stargate Conundrum, it actually goes further than that. There is a French dimension to this as well, which I haven't really brought in yet, because it would at this moment in time make it just far more confusing than making it clear to everybody.
Okay.
But it is clear that in the 1970s, within the American government, there were people who were inspired by what was happening in the late 1960s, LSD and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that perhaps there was something which could be of use. Quite often, purely selfish and purely military and purely negative interrogation tools for captured spies is probably something which they were primarily thinking about. Remote viewing as to whether there was something to the fact that psychic people could perhaps come back and come up with extremely detailed knowledge about enemy ships, enemy spies, anything.
Yeah.
And those kind of things, for things to work like that, there's always other work which needs to go on as well. And it's that kind of other work which has quite often been neglected, because it's the very basic fundamental principles. For a car to drive 100 miles an hour, you first need to get a car which drives. And we are all looking at Ferraris who can do much more than 100 miles an hour, but it's kind of like the basic principle. And because all of that research of remote viewing was done in secret, nobody's really seen from a public point of view a car developing into the Ferrari which can do a few 100 miles an hour today. And when all of the knowledge of remote viewing came about, everybody started looking on to the equivalent of the Ferrari or the tanks and all the negative stuff, whereas actually the core material and the story of the people involved has largely been neglected.
One interesting aspect is of course the U.S. military and their involvement in these kinds of areas of research, and I haven't been able to kind of figure out why they would go into this area from the start. It is of course, as you say, that they actually are, I guess, investigating every possible angle in regards to potential threats, and matter of fact, if they are able to verify that the use of remote viewing, for instance, could help them, I guess that they don't care what kind of means or measures that they use. They just want to get the information, all means necessary, I guess. Is that your take on it too?
Yeah, I think when we go back originally, I don't think this was an initiative from the military. I think some politicians or other people sold this to the military, and these other people, wanted the military to do certain things. And the way they sold it to the military was that remote viewing would have a lot of benefits for this and for that, and that it would help them in the defense of the nation and all of these kind of things. But I think it didn't start with the military. When you look at the core, you see how Puharich gets involved in 1952.
Yeah.
And he does his initial experiments with very rich and wealthy industrialists. There were people from the military around. He himself worked for the military at some point before and at some point after. But the military is very good for receiving orders and then carrying those orders out. And I think that's what happened here. Somebody gave the military an order, and they did all the research on remote viewing.
One thing also that I've been thinking about is the validity to the case or to this phenomena. I don't know what to call it, but I mean, is there a possibility here that we could be, in regards to from after when the military got involved, at least, that we are talking about, only a scenario where we have, psychedelic substances involved, and we have programs running like MKUltra, connections to the mind control programs, that all of this is just, fake, basically.
Fake in what sense?
I mean, in regards to that, they actually might be planting. There is some, research out there, in regards to that many, this is quite difficult to elaborate on, but let's say like this, to dive, into a new, let's say, the creation of a new religion. People want to go into the more new age stuff. You want even them to be occupied with potential, UFOs, alien threats, stuff like this, and to kind of plant the idea of these kinds of this kind of material would come about through through the use of people like Puharich and so forth, with them actually being involved in originally, I guess, in MKUltra programs. Do you think that is a possibility?
I think that there are many layers to this. The kind of like negative layer you're referring to. It is my belief that certain things were happening around Uri Geller in the 1970s. That they were, and when you look at it on a basic level, you do see that Puharich was probably instrumental in this. But you cannot escape the conclusion, and I'm not the only one who's drawn this conclusion. Jonathan Margolis, who's done a biography of Geller, has kind of like laughingly, jokingly referred to it in his biography of Geller as well. But in short, you do have to question whether these people were setting Uri Geller up as the next Messiah. And when you start to think of it, it all